Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor James Cole, and I'm Chairman of the Licensing Committee. I'm being supported by Councillor Phil Barnett, Vice Chairman, and the other members of the committee in attendance are Councillors Adrian Abbs, Jeff Beck, Graham Bridgman, Billy Drummond, Rick Jones, Tony Linden, David Marsh, Claire Rolls, and Martha Vickers. I'm saying that. Are we all actually here? I do not see David Marsh. He doesn't seem to be, doesn't seem to have arrived just yet. Joseph Holmes, Paul Anstey, Sean Murphy, Anna Smythe, Julia O'Brien, and Gabrielle Mancini are the officers who will be advising the meeting, whether or not they are all present just yet. Moira Fraser is the clerk to the meeting, and Linda Pye is acting as Zoom host of the meeting. Members, standard Zoom reminders are, or should be, being set out on the slide, now being, or about to be, displayed. If it becomes necessary for any members to telephone in, you won't be able to signal, of course, to speak. So once everybody's raised a Zoom hand has spoken, I will ask anyone who's telephoned in to speak in appropriate order. Voting on items will take place by physically raising your hand, please, and the clerk will confirm the outcome of the vote. Unless the committee asks for the vote to be recorded, the outcome of the vote will not appear in the minutes. So anyone wishing the vote to be recorded must indicate this before the vote is taken. If we need to adjourn the meeting at any point, I will adjourn and will advise the committee of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it's a short adjournment, you'll be able to rejoin this Zoom meeting, otherwise a fresh appointment will be sent out. So, item 1, apologies. I know of
point of order, Chairman. Apologies, but there was one thing that was going to be added to Chairman's briefings, which was about the end of the meeting. What we're trying to achieve, members, is that nobody leaves the meeting until the meeting has stopped being streamed, so we don't all sort of disappear off. And that was supposed to be added to Chairman's briefings generally. Thank you, Chairman.
Wasn't added to this one. Not a problem. Would make excellent sense. And I'm sure we're all getting used to that idea anyway. Return to the subject of apologies. We have seen a formal apology from Andy Williamson. That's the only one I've seen. Martha has joined us. That's great. Perhaps whoever else is missing will.
Sorry, I'm late.
Not a problem. Good to see you. If we have no other actual apologies, let's move on to the minutes. I'm going to be asking for a proposer and seconder of the minutes of the meeting on the 30th of November 2020, subject to the inclusion of the amendment as set out on the separate document circulated to members to remove the text in red writing on page 6 of the pack. Does anyone have any further comments on the minutes?
I'm happy to propose the minutes as you, with the amendment that you've mentioned this afternoon.
Thank you.
Second. Oh, somebody's beat me to it.
Okay, thank you very much. In which case, could we have a vote, please? Just raise hands, anybody who was actually present.
Chairman, I can confirm that the minutes as proposed and amended have been approved.
Thank you very much. In that case, you have my approval to attach my electronic signature. We move on to item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything they want to declare?
No, Chairman.
Councillor Abbs.
Yes, simply that I received a lobbying letter from a member of the taxi community this afternoon, or yesterday afternoon, sorry.
I imagine we've all received a series of lobbying emails, letters, whatever. Perhaps it would be appropriate to make that comment.
Same, mate.
Chairman, that's noted for the minutes.
Happy with that?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay.
Chairman, with one addition, which I've got my hand up, which is that I've also been lobbied on the fireworks motion. I suspect some of us, if not all of us, have been lobbied on that as well.
Some point in the past, yes.
Yeah.
Probably have. Would you like to record that as well, please, Moira?
We will do, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, we go on to item 4. Our Hackney Carriage Private Hire Licence Fees Consultation Responses Report. There's been a lot of correspondence on this item, including those emails in recent days. So as a result, there's also been a lot of discussion. Sean, would you like to introduce this report and update us as to where we now are?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think probably a good place to start is just explaining the history, just to remind members of the journey in which fees and charges take. So these fees and charges that are before the committee today that have been out to consultation started life at the Joint Public Protection Committee last September. They then subsequently came through to this committee in November, I believe, with a view that we would go out to consultation on the fees and charges in accordance with the law. So that consultation is now taking place. It's almost concluded, but because of the cycle of the meeting, we need to have the meeting slightly earlier. But I think we've got a good range of views in from the trade in any case, and we will deal with any subsequent views that come in the recommendations through a delegation, if that's okay, Chairman. So I think the first thing to say is that clearly the weight of the responses shows a very strong feeling by the trade. I think it's fair to say that basically they've had an exceptionally hard time, like a lot of businesses have. I mean, but more so than a lot of other businesses as well. There's lots of comments in there, references to the fact that they've lost upwards of 80% of their business during this period of time. Do you want me to wait, or is that Councillor Bridgman? Is that
Sean, I was getting in early.
Okay, I'll carry on. Yeah, so they've raised a range of issues. Obviously, and they can be summarised really into 3 or 4 kind of groupings. One of them was the fact that they've lost a large volume of trade, and they don't feel it's obviously appropriate to have a rise in fees at this time. That some other authorities have provided, and they've mentioned one authority there that has provided subsidy of fees, and I'll just deal with that point if I may now. It is true that one of our neighbouring authorities did subsidise fees for a couple of years when they were increased 2 or 3 years back, but that subsidy is now ended. And obviously, I think there's some reference in there to fees not being charged at all in this year, but obviously, basically, members may have a view on that. I mean, ultimately, there is a licensing regime that needs to be paid for. That said, returning to the substantive point that I made, clearly the trade has faced an exceptionally difficult time. There's a number of hands up. Do you want me to carry on? Yeah? Okay. And in some areas, basically, where we operate, I mean, there have been a substantial number of vehicles also lost to the fleet. What I can say is in West Berkshire, is looking at the figures as of today, there is somewhere around about 47, heading towards 50 vehicles that have already been lost year on year. And obviously, there are others that are facing difficulty at this time. They obviously provide, as we know, a valuable service to the community, and and we're conscious of that in presenting this report. And obviously, basically, the members have got a range of representations tonight, which obviously members will need to obviously consider carefully. There are. I think where we've got to is we've looked at this as officers. We've looked at the strength of feeling that's being represented in these responses to the committee. We're looking at the level of rise, which I think is £2 per licence for a vehicle, the number of vehicles that are in the fleet, and really are of the view that if the money can be found. Well, not if the money can be found, but there is an opportunity here to revisit these fees, not these fees, but the fees going forward, and propose at this time that perhaps the committee don't take the increase in fees. The reason being, there's lots of reasons for that, is that clearly the trade is changing. As I say, we've lost nearly 50 vehicles. We're in the middle of the third lockdown period. We don't know what the shape of the trade will look like going into the easing of, hopefully, of restrictions and into the next financial year. So in addition, really, to the proposal that we perhaps stay the fee in terms of the current fee at the moment, I would also propose as officers that we enter into a dialogue with the trade about what the trade may look like going forward, and part of that discussion would be about the fee base going forward as well. So I think that's probably all I want to say at this time, unless I can assist anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I think most of us will agree the world has moved on a bit since we started looking at this. So let's get some views. I'm going to give Vice Chairman's privilege and bring Councillor Barnett in first.
Thank you, Chairman, members. As Sean has said, you know, we are in very difficult times at this present period of 2021. In fact, I think a year or so ago, we were just considering locking down. And now, of course, a year on, the whole of the hotel, restaurant and taxi service support services has been very badly hit during the last few months. And as we've just heard from Sean, it's had a decimating effect actually on our local taxi owners and drivers in the authority. And it's at such a time when they have been, and hopefully they will be in the future, carry out a very important role for all our residents and support people that need some assistance in taken from, whether it's home to the station, or whether it's home to hospital or doctor's appointments or whatever it might be. We need to see that they're still going to be available. Having heard that we've lost so many, I think it will be totally irresponsible as a caring authority to actually be in a position of losing any more. And hopefully, and I think we're all hoping in the next 2 or 3 months that the lockdown will be reduced somewhat and we might get back to some form of normality. I think really this particular possible gesture of putting the possible increase on hold for a period, and as has been said by Sean, we have got the opportunity to revisit at a later stage. I think we do seriously need to be understanding and caring, or at least seem to be caring for this specific area of hospitality, where we do need these taxi services to be there at the end of the period. So I don't know whether you, Chairman, would like me to formally put that as a proposal that we definitely put the provisional increase on hold at this time and revisit at a later stage in the year, or whether you want me to hold back and wait for further comments from other members of the committee.
I'd like to hear what others had to say, but thank you for that. And yes, I'll be delighted to take a proposal from you later on. Perhaps Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. I had somewhat, let me start with a process piece. We've got a revision paper on the table. Can I suggest that we're actually, the proposed revised recommendations are numbered 1 to 5. Can I suggest they're actually numbered 2.1 to 2.5? Because that would then fit with the agenda and we'd know what we were talking about and where it sits in the agenda. Secondly, I'm not a great fan of what is now 2.2 because I think it just sits within 2.1. 2.1 asks us to make a recommendation to council as to what the licensing fees should be. That is the decision we're making. I don't think the steer in 2.2 is actually necessary, although I do go along with what has just been said by the Vice Chairman. and I will come to that in a moment. More fundamentally, I think there are two questions about the licensing regime for those businesses within West Berkshire that are licensed. Firstly, it's the fees they pay for whatever they are licensed to do. And the other is the question of support, business support during the COVID pandemic. So, for example, pubs have to pay, and we haven't said they don't need to pay. Indeed, it is a statutory duty to pay a licensing fee to be a pub. We then seek to support those pubs through a system of grants and loans, and the government loans, and so on and so forth. And I'll come back to that procedure and process in a moment. But I had some question about whether we should be changing the license fee structure arbitrarily, because if you recall, we spent an awfully long time this time last year, I seem to recall, getting to a point where we had a system of licensing and fees for the taxi and hackney carriage trade that made some logical sense and replaced what was a bit of an arbitrary structure that went before. So if I remind members that we now have so far as fees for licensing and reviewing licensing for vehicles, we have a 5-year scheme of fees that charges an amount per hour, per car, per vehicle. And I would not wish us to lose sight of that. And by the way, I know, and I'll come to him in a moment, Joseph Holmes in the room. By the way, Joseph, in the paper for Executive on Thursday, the table is stated to be new. Well, it was new last year. It's not new this year. Now, I do not disagree with what has been said about not raising fees this year. I think that is the right thing to do, and we should stick to where we are currently. But I would suggest, Chairman, that I'd like to see Joseph Holmes invited to address the committee about what support there is for the trade from money we've received from government and money we've put up ourselves in order to support business in West Berkshire that are suffering because of COVID. That will be a different route for a decision. It won't be full council that will make the decision. It'll be gold structure of the COVID piece. But I do want to see us at least be aware of that, because I think it's important that the trade, who are no doubt listening in, are aware of what might be done for them. Thank you, Chairman.
It did seem at an entirely appropriate moment, as the trade will be listening in, to bring Joseph in, and indeed he's just brought his face on screen. Nice to see you, Joseph. Shall we, however, finish the details of the rest before we ask Joseph to give us the answer on the support side? To my mind, that would be more sensible. Right, who's next? Adrian Abs. Councillor Abs.
Thank you, Chair. Really to second a lot of what Graham just said there, or Councillor Richard just said there, in that we fall into two parts here. The part which we deal with today, which is the fee structure, which a lot of time and effort has gone into, and then how do we make sure that we help the taxis survive to be able to pay us that licensing fee in the future. I would therefore be very happy to back anything, if Joseph can come along and say, yes, we can cover those fees for this coming year. That would make my day, to be honest, because I think that will not by itself make these companies survive this one fee, but it would certainly show that we're thinking about them. The other thing I would like to see added is, rather than just, as someone has already mentioned, we lost between 47 and 50 taxis already, and that may be because of specific hardship they're suffering right now. Can we not look to, if those same people were reapply in a year's time, at least offer the branch of you coming back at the renewal fee, even if you took a year's gap in actually being a licensed taxi with us. And just kind of, because there will be people will have gone under and they may want to come back when things have recovered, and it just seems a way of helping them back in again. So that's really all I wanted to say, because everybody else has already said everything. So, but yeah, thank you.
Councillor Rolls.
Thanks, Chair. Just to reiterate what Graham said, and obviously got in earlier than I did, I would like to see what other help and support is available to the taxi community drivers. And so, yeah, very interested to hear from Joseph.
Anybody else, or shall we bring Joseph in? Okay, Joseph. Councillor Beck has a comment to make. Councillor, you had your finger up, but you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. I noticed in the report on the goal meeting, which took place this morning, that there's actually a report to be brought back to the goal committee with regard to what support can be given to the taxi trade. Can anybody possibly throw any light on what potentially might be, I use the word kicking about?
You've muted yourself again.
Is anyone aware of what might possibly be kicking around, which could be allocated to assist the taxi trade in some way or other?
I can answer that one.
Chairman, point of order. I mean, because I was in the gold meeting this morning, and maybe I can just clarify for Councillor Beck that note is a reference to this discussion.
Yeah.
We are having the discussion that Gold anticipated, but obviously it's then a matter for Gold to make a decision if a decision is needed, which is why that note is written in the way it is.
It's not in effect, it is not for this committee to make that decision.
Absolutely not, Chairman. Indeed, it is not for this committee to make a decision on fees. It is for this committee to recommend to council a decision on fees. It's up to council to make that, ultimately to make that decision. And
Well, I'm pleased you do that, because there's no way we would have known that.
Okay, well, that's why Joseph Holmes is here to tell us about it. And in a moment, I'll bring him in. Councillor Linden, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm supportive of all the comments being made, but there is always a fluidity of people leaving the industry for a variety of reasons, not just because of COVID. Also, there are some people, I know somebody in private hire who's gone back to their original job in Sainsbury's because obviously lack of trade. So there are a variety of reasons. I just wanted to point that out, Chairman. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sure you're right on that. And we certainly hope that some of them will come back. West Berks, it seems, is not in fact as badly off as Bracknell and Wokingham, where the drop off in numbers is even worse. Right, Joseph, would you like to talk to us?
Thank you very much, Chairman. And yes, there's also Gabrielle Mancini here as well, Chairman, who might be able to pick up on a few items that I missed too. And just to sort of clear up, agree, there's a circular nature to this discussion between this meeting and Gold and full council. But I just want to highlight some of the measures that have been put in place by the government and by the council. So at the moment, we're administering about 9 or 10 different separate business grant schemes through from central government. And a lot of those are geared towards those businesses who have got property costs. So a significant amount of that money goes towards those. However, we do have something from government called the Additional Restrictions Grant, where we have some flexibility around payments in respect of that. And it's on our website for all to see how the ARG, as I'll sort of summarise it, works. But there's 4 different parts to it, parts A to part D. Now, there is some element in here which might be applicable to some of the taxi firms. Most likely, Part D, which is where we have a scheme for exceptional hardship. The forms are there on the website, but that would be the area that which is probably most applicable to this this area. Some other elements are due to property. Some other elements are due to non-property businesses got non-property costs, but where they've been forced to close. So there is some relationship there. And also, yeah, there has been some separate government support, I believe, that's been provided. I think, Gabrielle, you might be able to pick me up on this, but some of the self-employment schemes as well. But our main area that we have, where we have some discretion, is this additional restrictions grant. And we have put that grant and the different parts of that grant through Goal to make decisions.
Gabrielle, what would you like to add? Good afternoon to you. Nice to see you.
Hey, you too. I think, yes, I think it's probably worth just reflecting the fact that with some of the other grants that are issued on a blanket basis for individual industries, it's done on the basis of the fact that every single business in that industry is forced to close completely and therefore has no source of revenue. However, although obviously they will have been impacted, taxi companies will still have been able to operate. So in order to apply for the additional restrictions grant that we're administering, what we'd need them to do is demonstrate that the hardship has occurred. And in the event that they are able to do that, you know, it's likely that we'd look favourably upon that, as there is that element of being ancillary to hospitality and leisure, but we would have to see that proof before we were able to issue the funding, because if we were to do it on a blanket basis and perhaps, you know, a taxi company had a rolling contract with a hospital or whatever, and so their income hadn't taken a hit, you would then have a company getting a grant in spite of the fact that they hadn't actually experienced the hardship. So we just need to see that, and once we have, you know, we are able to offer that support.
So what do they need to show? They need to show they've lost 60, 70, 80%, whatever it is, of their business.
Yes, so there's a section on the form, and there's certain paperwork that we'd need to be able to see in order to have that demonstrated to us. The business rates team will then assess those applications on that basis, and make a recommendation for either grant funding or not grant funding, depending on the impact that's been demonstrated.
Business rates sounds property oriented, but these are taxis.
So it's just the business rates team who are administering the grant, because they are best placed to be able to do that from a, you know, just from a kind of administrative sense. It's not actually that it's only available to businesses that are rated. It's just that they're the team carrying out the work. Given that
so not to be put off by that.
No. It's just they just happen to be the team administering it. It's nothing to do with the fact that a business is either rated or not.
Okay, thank you both for that. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Beck has his finger up, but he's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much, Joseph, for that, and Gabrielle. Can I put it to members, do you consider it to be a good idea and a very good gesture if the West Berkshire Council were to write to the taxi trade and make this the brief details of this additional restrictions grant known to them, and indicating as to, you know, how they might apply and to whom they might apply?
That's certainly a possibility. Who's next? Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chair. And there's one little bit of additional information I could do with, really, which is the actual revenue that we're receiving from all of this licensing activity to do with taxis, and that the grant pot is large enough to cover this if necessary. Could I, before I actually then go on to make any other comment, could I get confirmation that they do match each other, or this one is substantially larger than the other?
Joseph, would you like to comment on that?
I'm afraid I don't have the top of my head. I don't know if Sean knows, but I don't have the total amount of income that we get specifically from taxi licensing. But Mr. Murphy might well know a bit better than I.
I can certainly work that out for you, Councillor Abs. But I think almost the issue of fees, if I've got this right, the issue of fees and the issue of grants available to businesses are almost two separate issues.
They are, but before making a suggestion, no point in making a suggestion if there's no money the pot isn't big enough to pay for it. Yeah.
I think the application for the grant is not necessarily to cover the fee. It's an application for a grant for hardship. Is my understanding. Is that correct, Gabrielle?
Yes, it would be. And it's probably also worth noting that the funding that we've had through for the additional restrictions grant must last us until March next year. And obviously there are, a large number of local businesses who have been impacted. So, if we are to make a broad brush approach to one industry, we would have to also, bear in mind the fact that there are businesses in other industries, and you go into people who do wedding discos and all sorts of things like that. So it's a real broad bunch of companies that we are dealing with. So we will have to balance that.
Yeah, I totally accept that, but we're a licensing committee looking at taxis, so I'm blinkered on that for now. What council can look at. So the obvious thing, listening to Josie, listening to Gabrielle and others, we're going to put the barrier to applying for some money is fairly high. First of all, it's the additional restriction grant doesn't seem the ideal vehicle for this. It's a pity there's no other grants out there, Joseph. So can we kind of knock on the door of government? It's just a back channel here. But if we are going to come along, it's going to take some time to process it in the way that you've described. It goes to this committee and an evaluation is made. And of course, the applicant will have to spend time filling the forms in and so on. And then we look at the size of the if I'm looking at single taxis and the ones that we're losing, I would much rather we do a blanket approach. And that is why I was trying to find out just where the two numbers were. Because one is very, very simple to administer and it's just one line sign off and done. And the other one is a complex process, which will take lots of officer time.
But Councillor, this is separate to the licensing.
It is indeed. But
it is not in the gift of this committee at all. We're simply taking the opportunity of telling the taxi trade that there is actually something there they can apply for.
Indeed, I just fear that we're giving them slightly false hope. Yeah, I'll stick with what I said. I think we need to find a recommendation to abandon the fee this year. Then it would be my change if we are only allowed to focus on this one thing.
We can only focus on
my proposal would be that as a committee we recommend that no fee is taken this year for taxi licensing.
You wish to make that proposal?
Given that we've been clear that no other option is possible other than saying there might be a grant year.
Well, we have a proposal which I have deferred. Maura, you'll have to tell me what I can and cannot do. But Councillor Barnett has already made a proposal.
Yeah, but once we've had Councillor Barnett's proposal is on the table, we would need to have a discussion and then a vote on that before moving to any additional proposal.
Well, I consider that Councillor Barnett's proposal is on the table.
We would just need to
may I second Councillor Barnett's proposal in order to put that in place?
Thank you. Happy to continue talking about this. I still have Councillor Rolls wanting to talk.
Thanks, Chairman. It was just that Gabrielle was saying. I think you mentioned that they had to go out of business. But then you went on to say that the taxi drivers had to sort of then demonstrate substantial decrease in income. I think we just need to be absolutely clear on that point. And I suspect my next point is not for this committee, and that was really about just, I hope that we give some weight to where taxi drivers are, for example, transporting people to supermarkets to get food or to work. And there was, reading through, there was a couple of examples where people were being taken to work where the weather was pretty poor. So it was just a sort of comment on that basis, but I appreciate it's probably not for this committee.
Okay, let's, who else? Councillor Barnett.
My point was nothing in relationship to the motion. It was coming back to comments that Joseph and Gabrielle had mentioned, and I think it's been partially answered. But if I can just come through you, Chairman, to Gabrielle, you were mentioned about this post-hardship fund, which might have to cover a 2-year period, and of course, you know, the taxi trade might have to look very closely at the reductions, and if it is 80% or up to that figure that we've already been told, that could be well over an 18-month period. So I suppose the question I would say is that if they are able to look at that period, they will obviously have to be able to generate the information to guarantee that they might be eligible to achieve some figure of their losses for that particular period. Am I correct in thinking that way?
Gabrielle, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I think it's probably just worth reflecting. So a business doesn't have to have gone out of business; they just have to demonstrate that they have had that significant loss. And it's probably also worth reflecting to you as well that you know, when the additional restrictions grant became available to us, we wrote our initial policy, and we have since tweaked that to reflect the changing position. And, you know, given where we are with having a goal committee and being able to take those decisions very quickly, we are, you know, we're not averse to changing it again if the evidence suggests that we should. So I just kind of want to reassure you that we're keeping an eye on it, and as and when new evidence becomes available about impact on certain sectors or certain individual businesses, you know, we can change the policy to reflect that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph, but we're also probably in the situation whereby if we get to the point where we are looking like we're running out of money ahead of the time that the money is supposed to last us for, at that point, we could perhaps through our members of parliament make the case for additional funding locally if you know, businesses are starting to struggle and we're still not seeing an uplift in income for businesses that have been impacted in the last year.
I'm sure we can. I'm sure you're right on that. I'm sure we will. And out of this meeting, in any case, you'll be reporting back to Gold. So we'll see what happens from there. Councillor Marsh, good afternoon. Good to see you. Councillor Vickers, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Oops. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was going to ask whether we consider reducing the fees, but after listening to Councillor Abbs, I'd be happy to support his suggestion also, bearing in mind that what we're hearing about this hardship fund is that it's limited, it's got to stretch quite some time. It might be a little bit complicated for people having to apply for it. So I'd be supporting Councillor Abbs' suggestion.
Well, there's a proposal coming up in a moment.
I realise
you'll be able to vote on that.
Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of comments. I'd half support Councillor Beck's suggestion that we should perhaps be proactive in letting the trade know that the ASG fund is available, and but that could be done by publicity rather than individual letters, I think, which would probably be too labour intensive. I think we should treat the licensing and the support separately, because I suspect that if successful, these in terms of applying for grant, the grant funding would far exceed the fee that we're talking about here, which is literally only a few hundred. We're talking about income loss that's far greater than that, and therefore probably grant funding could be greater than that as well.
Absolutely, a very good reason for keeping them separately. Absolutely correct.
I'd keep them absolutely separately.
Sean, can you comment on the on how we will tell the trade what's available?
I think for I mean, Julia may be able to assist with this, but I think we've already put this on our website, haven't we, Julia, about the availability of the potential for this particular grant. What we haven't done, I don't believe, is actually write out directly to the individual members of the trade. But we could. There are things that we can do, basically, should the committee instruct us to do so.
Okay. Well, I think that I agree that that is a good idea, that you should tell the trade what's available. Be as helpful as we can in that respect.
That isn't a problem, because obviously, because of the nature of what we do have contact details, individual contact details.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I've got no more hands up. So I suggest that since we have a proposal and a second, then we should go to a vote on it. Do we need to actually set out what the proposal is now? I do believe we do.
Chairman, I think that would be useful.
Recommendation is the consultation responses are set out in the agenda, and any raised verbally at the meeting be taken into account prior to the licensing committee making a recommendation to the executive and full council as part of the annual fee setting process. Recommendation to full council to confirm that the fees be set at the existing rates. They'd be reviewed later in the year when the medium and longer term impact COVID has had on the trade can be ascertained. Authority be delegated to the head of public protection and culture in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the licensing committee to make any other minor amendments to the fees arising from comments made after the meeting and before the closing date of consultation on the 11th of February 2021. In the event that any consultation responses are received that would have a significant impact on the fee setting process, a special licensing committee meeting would be convened before a final determination on the fees is made at full council on 2nd of March 2021. A meeting of the Taxi and Private Hire West Berkshire Council Liaison Group be set up as soon as practical to consider the impact COVID has had on the trade. Just before we vote, I will comment on that. The fourth item, which is this is a resuscitation of a set of meetings that we've had in the past, which has been very useful to get the views of the trade on what we're doing. So if you would be so kind as to vote on that by raising your hands for all in favour of that motion. And against? Moira?
Chairman, I can therefore confirm that the recommendation as amended at this meeting is carried.
Thank you. Right, since that's carried, we will continue on to the next item. Item 5, the PPP response to West Berkshire Council's fireworks motion. I think, Anna, you're going to introduce this.
Yes, Chair, thank you. So the paper here contains information concerning the firework motion that was in papers for full council in September. The motion itself is set out in Appendix A, page 52, and will be going to full council in March. So I apologise that following consultations with committee services around the order and timelines around this and processes, it's been necessary to amend the recommendations. So before I start, if I can just run through those. So within the report, I think there are, on the papers that went out, there were 4 recommendations, 2.1 to 2.4. They will be replaced by 2.1 to 2.3. So we have now that for the licensing committee to agree the proposed response of the Public Protection Service to the motion submitted to full council on the 10th September concerning the impact of fireworks. 2.2, to recommend that the response be submitted to the council meeting on the 2nd of March 2021. And 2.3 is to bring the final policy approval to the June committee of the licensing committee for final consideration and approval. So with those in mind, I'm happy to repeat those at the end. So the report itself, as I said, I've set out the motion that went. This was to require public firework displays within the local authority to advertise in advance of the event, with the aim really around protection of animals and vulnerable people. And that really is the aim, I think, of the motion itself, is that protection, predominantly of animals, but also vulnerable people. Point 2 was to actively promote public awareness campaign about the impact of fireworks on animal welfare and vulnerable people. That included precautions to be taken to mitigate risks. Third factor was to write to the UK government urging them to introduce legislation to limit the maximum noise level of fireworks to 90 decibels for those that are sold to the public for private displays. And the fourth part being to encourage local suppliers of fireworks to stock quieter fireworks for public displays. This comes from a RSPCA report, which I've included in this in Appendix D as well. It sets out a lot of information within that report, which is reiterated in the Environmental Protection UK leaflet, which is also attached, which is why therefore in Appendix B, which is my main part of the report around the work that the PPP is already doing, brings all of that part together. So I've tried to kind of give everybody a full picture of the work that the Public Protection Service currently undertakes, that being around our animal welfare roles, our trading standards roles around licensing premises that they're able to sell. On that note, I should say, I think it's on page 55 for anyone who is noticed, just point, sorry, I'm losing my track now, page 55, made a note of it, didn't make note of the paragraph number. 4.1 on page 55, it does mention there currently X licenses in the West Berkshire area. There are 18 premises currently licensed for selling fireworks, and we were able to carry out 4 formal inspections of those premises prior to the 5th of November and during the period of, I think it was just the start of the second lockdown period that we've had. As a service, we've dealt with 20 complaints in 2019-20, 33 this current year. Those cover a range of inquiries from people, do they require a license to have a firework display? Some complaints about noise, complaints about, what can you do from debris from a display? So there's a whole range of that. I think about a quarter of those were specifically noise complaints, and a number of those did relate to impacts on animals. So reviewing the information that's already there around the PPP, it was deemed suitable, I think, really to pull together what we have and what we do as a service in a clear and concise way that also sets out in a policy statement that we can audit and check on the quality and monitoring of the service that we're providing to put the policy together, which, as I said, we'll be bringing back in June. In terms of the motion itself, we have looked at the wording on each of those points, and with regards to 3 of them, more around campaigns and promotion, we are already incredibly active on social media and media campaigns around fireworks, whether that's notifying people, reminding them of bringing animals in if they can, good sort of responsible displays. And we have also said that we can undertake, when we're doing the any checks or any licenses of those selling fireworks, we can put some promotional leaflets, advice that can be handed out to those when they're purchasing. So there's lots of steps there that we can do and fully support the work and the motion around that. The area where we've had concerns is that where the 90 decibels, which is the third part, which on its own as it stands, it would be a difficult one to support in terms of the technical acoustic criteria applied on it. There's no, as I've set out, there's no indication of kind of distance over what time period that would be monitored, measured, take place, etc. There are already on the existing controls around on the pyrotechnic articles regulations that already sets out noise levels of fireworks that can be sold for various types of displays, and that does set distances on it. So as a service, when we've been looking at whether we would recommend to this committee that they look at maybe amending the wording of the proposal, that wasn't deemed appropriate either, in the sense that as from my own perspective, dealing in acoustics, I'm dealing with the human response rather than an animal response. I'm not an expert in that area, and I don't believe we have people in the service that could provide a more technical advice to suggest a different noise level that would be suitable for animals. And in the same sense, the sorry, there was a second part to that completely lost for a moment. I'll come back to it if I recall that part. But it wasn't deemed appropriate to amend that condition. So I would suggest that what I will be putting to the committee is that actually that part is just removed from it, as there are already measures in place around the sale of fireworks at levels and noise levels that are already set out. I think that's probably a whistle stop. I've realised that my heater's gone off and I'm a bit cold, so sorry if
You're not on your own, I'm sure.
I just know, as I was talking, I was feeling cooler. I'm happy to go through those recommendations. I appreciate their amended ones. If anyone would prefer me to go through that before taking any questions.
Shall we move to questions? I'm getting the feeling that you're telling us what is practical. Councillor Bridgman once again has managed to stick his hand up first.
Chairman, thank you. Yeah, a question, Anna, and then a couple of comments. At part one of your paper about the advertising aspects of the motion, you refer to the proposal would require, if we adopted it, all public fireworks displays to advertise events. And you go on to say, unclear who would be expected to enforce this. My question is, what would be enforced? In other words, what would someone who didn't advertise be breaching? If this was not if this event, whatever it was, didn't have to have a premises license or a temporary event notice to be able to run, what I'm not understanding, and I suspect you aren't either, is what anyone would be enforcing. In other words, how would someone who didn't advertise a fireworks event be breaking the law?
I'd agree. I think it's, I can't see there's any legislation currently, and it may be the reasoning behind the motion of the RSPCA to try and push towards some form of regulation around it. I couldn't find anything particularly. As I said, if it's involved in a license and we become aware of it, we can actively encourage event holders to do the advertising. But if they don't, currently I can't identify anything that would be breaching anything that we could enforce.
Thank you. Chairman, if you'll forgive me, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read to you that as I said earlier in the meeting, I've had this RSPCA motion put to me by a number of constituents seeking support and seeking me to put it to council. I've told those constituents that it is going through this process and is being reviewed. But let me tell you what I have said to these respondents. Draft motion seeks to require, emphasis added, all public firework displays within local authority boundaries to be advertised in advance of the event. However, local licensing authorities such as West Berkshire have no licensing powers over firework displays. Might be an action over a statutory nuisance at the extreme, but that would be after the event. So I don't follow what powers the RSPCA is suggesting we would use to require advertising. And the other point I make is that public displays, which is what the RSPCA are talking about, advertise themselves. They go out of their way to advertise the fact that there's a public display because they want people to go. That's the revenue angle. So actually, the lack of advertising, the lack of notice, I would suggest is much more to do with private displays with fireworks than public displays, which is what the RSPCA is asking us to attack. The other point I made to the respondent is that the draft motion seeks to require that we write to the UK government urging them to introduce legislation to limit the maximum noise level of fireworks to 90 decibels for those sold to the public for private displays. Now, as Anna has just said, and I raised this point, I think with her at a conversation about the PPP, that's just rubbish. I've made applications for a premises license in respect of music events. And if you have a decibel level, you've got to have a distance. You cannot have a level of sound without saying where you're measuring it from. And so I have to say that as a draft motion from a major public charity, this is very, very poorly worded, very poorly drafted. I have sympathy with what it's trying to achieve, but really, if public bodies are going to put out motions asking their constituents to put it before their local authority, they at least ought to draft it properly in the first place. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I take Councillor Bridgman's point and the point made by the officer, but I don't think that I think we're in danger of getting too much bogged down with the technicalities. And there's talk about parameters and how it would be measured and so forth. But we're not asking, as a council, we're not being asked to enforce this and work out exactly what the 90 decibels mean. We're being asked to support something that's been put forward by the RSPCA. They say, quite clearly, setting the limit at 90 would be consistent with the approach in other countries and encourage manufacturers to design and produce quieter fireworks. And to me, it seems that what this does is send out the message that West Berkshire Council does not like loud fireworks because of the great distress they cause to animals in the district. And I think that's a good message to send out, and fretting too much about how it gets drafted at the other end. We're only going to go to the government and say, we support the RSPCA on this, can you do something about it? And that seems to me something that's worthwhile, even if it's not possible to make the technicality of it foolproof and technically sound. So, I mean, Councillor Bridgman may be right. It may not be the best worded motion, but I still think it's a good thing for us to support. And I think our residents will appreciate it. I too get a lot of correspondence from people in the ward and beyond, actually, concerned about fireworks. And I think this is an issue that people feel it's time something was done about, because those of us who have pets are tired of having to go to the vet every year to get doggy tranquilizers or whatever it might be, and tired of having to go through an increasing period, really, anything up to about a fortnight either side of November the 5th, when our pets are going to be subject to, as I say, great distress, which is principally due to the volume. And I'm not against firework displays. I'm involved with organising one at the school where I'm a governor, which my child attends. I think well-organised displays that are responsibly run are fine, but I think we could be sending out a message here, and I think it's sending out an unfortunate message if we water this down, so that we're not addressing the noise issue at all. So I would say that we should keep it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've just got a slight query. I thought the government some time ago wanted, and I don't know if there was legislation on it, that only allowed private displays at certain times, which was New Year's Eve, Diwali, fireworks on the 5th of November, rather than all over the place. I think someone's going to answer that, Chairman.
Anna, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, it's the firework. It's page 74, the Environmental Protection UK leaflet, but it just states there it's firework regulations. It's Chinese New Year, it's Diwali, 15th of October through to the 10th of November to allow for bonfire night celebrations, and then 26th to the 31st of December for the New Year's celebrations. And it also talks about timings. That's predominantly been enforced by the police, and is more around the antisocial behaviour side of things, linked to you know, just people letting them off in the streets as well and things like that.
Does that answer you, Councillor Linden? I think that's a yes. Councillor Rolls.
Yes, Chairman.
I'd just like to thank Anna for all her work on this. I was very supportive of this motion, which Councillor Somner brought to full council, I think last time, and I made it very clear that I was extremely supportive on a number of levels, both in terms of vulnerable people, the impact of that, not just domestic animals, which I'm a huge dog lover and animal lover myself, but also on the farming community as well. So there's many aspects to this, but I do appreciate that we are limited in what we can do as a local authority and our powers, as Councillor Bridgman has pointed out. But we are not going to ever get the perfect motion drafted by a public body, I suspect. And I think this is about the principles, the message and the sentiment behind what we are trying to achieve, and behind what the RSPCA are trying to achieve. And I think, you know, lobbying Parliament on all fronts on this, whether it's specific around a specific point raised by the RSPCA, or more widely and generally to improve the current situation. So I welcome this. I think it's the right decision, and I think as a council it sends out the right message to our public. And I really do welcome the fact that we are going as far as we possibly can with policy, which is as much as we can do. Thank you.
I read you as saying that you're accepting the amended motion. Certainly, the fact that we will end up with a fireworks policy out of this is a very good thing. Councillor Bagg.
Thank you, Chairman. I would say here that we are actually considering the use of fireworks in three different sets of circumstances. One is where the general public are invited to attend, and as has been mentioned, is normally widely advertised. There is then what I might call private events, which are put on by professional firework contractors for weddings and birthdays, etc. And then there is the sales to the general public, who actually sort of let fireworks off, you know, wherever they please within reason. And I would suggest that on page 52, the final bullet point, Chairman, where it says to encourage local suppliers of fireworks to stock quieter fireworks for public display, I would suggest that instead of for public display, it should read for sale to the general public. Because they are, you know, when, as you might say, individual householders buy fireworks, they are not, in my view, for public display. I don't know what people think about that. The other thing is that it would seem we are proposing not to write to central government, I see no harm whatsoever in writing to central government supporting RSPCA's aims. I think we are all in accordance with what they are trying to achieve. But quite clearly, nobody in this council or any other normal council has the competence to determine the actual details as to whether 90 decibels is a suitable limit, distances, etc., etc. And that is obviously a detail for the experts. But I don't see why we should not write to central government requesting that they establish conditions for public firework displays. That's it.
I have some further comments, or I'd be interested to hear what Councillor Bridgman, for example, might say to that. But let's have Councillor Abbs back on.
Time on this one, sir. Just really to Councillor Bridgman's comment, he's absolutely right. DBs are pretty much always linked to distance. So if you don't have a distance, that basically says that anybody that receives a sound of 90 decibels, then that's it. So, so the 90 decibel is, you can set it as a valid limit, but it just therefore applies everywhere. So you could be a metre away from the sound and it'd be 90 decibels there. You could be a mile away from the sound, but 90 decibels still applies. So you could bring the 90 decibel limit in and ignore the distance, but it just means anybody perceiving the sound whatsoever, no matter how far they are away, it must be limited to that. Is it really?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnett.
I mean, on the last point that Councillor Abbs is mentioned, I mean, I think we're probably not professional to look at the decibel level in relationship to
I was basing my comment on my physics degree, so I would.
Okay, well, sorry to disagree. Sorry to come into issues. I mean, I was actually going to mention the issue of protection, scatter, and actually responding off of services, but I don't think this is probably appropriate for that, Councillor Abbs. But I think that there's been obviously a variety of views across the members, but I think to try and drive this forward, I mean, we've had suggestions from Emma in relationship, Anna, I mean, in relationship to what would be a sensible and appropriate method of moving this forward in an acceptable way that the authority could move. And, I don't know, Chairman, whether you're looking specifically for proposal in line of what could be taken to the 2nd of March meeting that would meet the approval of this committee, and then obviously for a discussion at the full council on that day, and then to return back to this next full licensing meeting on the 21st of June.
If you're happy to propose the recommendations, which is the amended, revised recommendations, that would be good. Anna has put to us what she thinks is practical. That doesn't stop any of us going outside that and lobbying central government. But from the point of view of the PPP and licensing, Anna has, I repeat, put to us what she thinks is practical. So if you're happy to propose that. Excellent.
Chairman, I think before formally proposing that, we're in a position of obviously perhaps having some wise words from Councillor Bridgman, and I would like just to, if it's on the same subject, I perhaps would like to just hear his specific views before I formally put that as a proposal.
I'm sure Councillor Bridgman's words will be on the same subject. Would he ever do otherwise? Councillor Bridgman.
They might well be, Chairman. Thank you. Yes, and I'm very happy to propose what officers are proposing that we adopt as a motion. The reason and Councillor Abbs is absolutely correct. And indeed, Anna sets out in the note the reasons why 90 decibels, just saying 90 decibels is meaningless. Does that mean 90 decibels going off an inch from your ear or 90 decibels a mile away? They are very, very different sounds. And 90 decibels an inch from your ear does not sound 90 decibels if you're on the ground looking at a firework display, whereas 90 decibels a mile away is a very, very loud sound indeed if you're close to it. So I absolutely, and Anna quite rightly says, not proposed, council supports this part of the motion, main reason being the lack of clear acoustic parameters. If we define how far away we are measuring the 90 decibels, then I'm very happy to consider supporting that. But at the moment, as it's written, it doesn't work. And as far as advertising is concerned, as I've said, we have, I think has been agreed, we don't have the power to do what is being asked of us. We just can't do it. So let's get a policy. Let's understand what we can and can't do. Let's certainly, absolutely have an advertising campaign, a media campaign to bring these issues to the attention of the public. Absolutely support that 100%. And let's get a fireworks policy that we can all agree and stands the test of practicality. That's what I'm trying to get out of this. I'm trying to get practical solutions that actually work in real life so that environmental officers and PPP officers can go out and enforce the damn thing and say, right, you are breaching whatever we have in, and we have the power to stop you doing it. That's what we have to end up with. And I'm very happy to propose what is on the table, Chairman.
It would also be quite useful if we did end up with a policy that was the same across the three councils, Bracknell and Wokingham as well.
Indeed.
Councillor Barnett, are you happy with that idea?
Well, I mean, I think he's. I've given him that extra opportunity to enlighten the committee with a few other points, which I probably should have done as well. But I mean, he's put that formal proposal, so I'm quite happy to actually second it, including all those extra points.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just clarify what exactly on the papers we're actually voting for? Which page, please, to start off with?
We have some revised recommendations. Would you like me to read out the revised recommendations that we
Yes,
are?
the one I'm particularly concerned about, Chairman, is this one about the asking local suppliers, blah, 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 where it says to the general public. Sorry, where it says, oh God, I can't find the damn thing now.
It did get changed from the original recommendation.
Ah, right.
Shall I?
Yeah, if you'd read it out, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. The recommendation now runs for the licensing committee to agree the proposed response of the Public Protection Service to the motion submitted at full council on 10th of September 2020 concerning the impact of fireworks, to recommend that the response be submitted to the council meeting on the 2nd of March 2021, bring the final policy approval to the June meeting of licensing for final consideration and approval. That's how it now reads.
Sorry? That's it, is it?
That is it.
Okay, righto.
So I have a proposer, I have a seconder. Could we put this to the vote, please? All in favour? And against? And do we have any abstentions? Moira?
Chairman, I can confirm that the revised recommendation as tabled at the meeting has been carried.
Thank you. Right. In that case, item 7, forward plan. Next meeting is due to take place on the 21st of June. Does anybody have, and that's members and officers, do you have any comments, amendments you'd like to make to that forward plan? Councillor Bridgman, you have your hand up.
Indeed, Chairman. Something that's in the minutes of the last meeting, and indeed we have discussed as part of the conversation about Hackney carriage and taxi and private hire fees, is a meeting with the trade or continued discussions with the trade. And I'm not, unless I'm missing it, Sean, I'm not seeing this leaping out at me from the forward plan. I'm not saying it should necessarily be in there, but I invite you to consider whether it should be in there, and if so, where.
Chair, if I may, I mean, obviously, earlier in the agenda today, we have agreed that we should go and talk to the trade as soon as practical, as soon as possible, really. So what I would propose actually that we come back in June with an update from those discussions, and there may be some recommendations that arise out of those discussions that pick up some of the points that Councillor Bridgman has mentioned. I mean, there are issues anyway, things like the conditions that we're looking at, tariffs as well, and I think we can probably bring all up back in June following the more recent discussion with the trade that we're about to have.
But the target would be to start a discussion with the trade by...
Oh, certainly in the next few weeks, early March. You know, I think we need to basically start to, you know, to have that broader discussion to cover all of these points.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor Bridgman?
Yeah, it's just, my question was, should that be something in the forward plan, really?
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is that we put that on as an item, basically an update, basically from this, so effectively an update report from discussions with the trade.
Okay. Anna.
Yes, we will just need to add the fireworks policy to come back to the June meeting as well.
Okay. Anybody else? No? In that case, we are asked to note the forward plan. And as far as I'm concerned, all business has now been completed. Thank you, everybody, for attending.